Thank you, and a big welcome to our guest speakers. Hello to everyone who's watching. My name is Georgios Kasimatis. I'm the Director of Regulatory Affairs in DNV. Today we will discuss the EU ETS and the integration of shipping in it. And I'm joined on this panel by Fotinio Anithou, Head of Unit in the Directorate General for Mobility and Transport at the European Commission. Stamatis Tsadanis, Chairman and CEO at Synergy Maritime Holdings and the Founder, Chairman and CEO at United Maritime Corporation. Frédéric Boutillier, Head of Shipping at Vertis Environmental Finance. And Mette Asmussen, the lead for maritime sector initiatives at the World Economic Forum. So I would like to get us going straight away, starting with, let's say, a warm-up that will help us frame our discussion later on why we must learn to navigate the EU ETS and what we want to master about it. I would like to have, let's say, your 1-minute pitch to the following questions. And Matt, I would like to start with you. So from the forum's perspective, why are cap and trade systems like the EU ETS important for decarbonizing the world economy? Here you go, Matt.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me on this panel today. So maybe I'll just start out with that. So at the forum, we're really focused on how can we really achieve progress through multi-stakeholder dialogues. But one thing is really kind of creating that momentum from industry action and maintaining that momentum, but driving real progress is really impactful when you have the mechanism between what is industry actions and what is the regulatory framework that really enables that. So for us, the economic mechanisms such as ETS are kind of a fundamental part of that conversation. So through economic mechanisms like in the regulatory framework, that's really where the public constituents can be, that's where they play their part of the public-private equation. And industry action is then on top of that. It's really where you can create the certainty for the actions that the industry constituents are taking. So that's why we really see the role of economic mechanisms like ETS being key.
Exactly, fantastic. And that leads me very nicely to the next question for Tini. How does then the EU ETS impact EU industries and also EU citizens?
Thank you, George, and thank you for having me here. I'll start with what Mette has just said. First of all, well, it's a system that brings certainty. Certainty about the reduction in terms of greenhouse gas emissions because it's a cap and trade scheme. So it ensures that all sectors covered under the system will contribute to EU climate efforts. And you know that as EU, we have really high ambitious objectives set now in the EU's climate law. Second element, I think it's important, is the element of cost effectiveness because ETS being a market-based system, it ensures that emissions take place where it is cheapest to do so. Third, which is more relevant for the shipping sector, it creates a price signal, which we hope will incentivize energy efficiency improvements and will reduce the price gap between alternative fuels and traditional maritime fuels. And the last but not least, it brings support because the revenues are used to finance mitigation actions as well as innovation. And we think that our innovation fund, where revenues are going, will be a catalyzer in helping the maritime sector to decarbonize.
Thank you very much. Now, let's go on the more operational side of things and the mechanics of that. So, Frédéric, based on your experience, what is different or important to note about trading and surrendering EUAs?
Thanks, Georgios, and thanks to Capital Link for having me on board today. And it was also a great pleasure to present just before this panel a webinar dedicated to EU ETS. To answer to your specific question, trading EUAs to acquire them is basically the first and necessary step moving forward. And that's obviously for at least two reasons. Being a financial regulated product, it is important to have a good understanding of the EU ETS market and what are the elements driving it. Very important. It's also, in a second point, to have an established trading strategy. That's very important, in line with your shipping profile and your commercial trading pattern, which can be based on volume, price, and timing. Then, being a compliant entity, obviously, you will most likely bank the units in your GHG account before to surrender them before the next deadline, i.e. for shipping September 2025. However, this doesn't prevent, obviously, ship owners and compliant entity to sell the units and buy them again, trying to improve their average cost by optimizing their entry points. A non-compliant entity will trade or buy EUAs, but with the only intention to sell them at a later stage, as their approach is only a speculative one. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. And finally, Kasimatis, to you. So, what does the EU ETS mean to you at first glance? Just on its surface, is it a threat? Is it an opportunity? Let's get with that first impression from your side too.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today. For us, the EU ETS is a necessary measure to be implemented. I fully agree with Fotini's previous comment that it's going to help the industry best utilize the fleet and make it more and more efficient, because we feel that the current fleet operating not only in European waters but also in the global waters is not fully optimized, especially the dry bulk fleet, and that has a lot of room for improvement. I think that the EU ETS is the first monetary element of all the new regulations that have been introduced into the market that is going to have an impact on the cash flow of the companies, the charters, and the end users. Because all these years we've been hearing about the EXI and the CII and now the EU ETS, but the EU ETS is the first actual monetary impact on the companies, and that is going to help rationalize, improve, and best optimize the fleet, which has a lot of room for improvement. As far as we are concerned, and we fully applaud that, as far as we are concerned, we do not take an active or a passive view. We don't see that as a threat or as an opportunity. The only opportunity is the fleet optimization. As far as the cash flow is concerned, for our companies, the boards have decided to be a complete pass-through on the EU ETS, meaning that since we operate all our fleet under time charter agreements, we feel that all the benefit or the cost associated with the EU ETS system is going to be passed through our company from the charters down to all the chain of the transportation chain, and I believe this is proper. The role of the ship owners in all the regulatory environments, in my opinion, is not to reinvent the wheel, but try to be part of the whole chain in the most efficient way. That's it as far as we're concerned. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you for sharing these insights, and I think that also leads me very nicely into the next part. We have already started zooming in to several aspects of the ETS here, and I would say that we are done with our warm-up. So let's get to the topic even deeper together with our viewers. I want to turn to the fact that several actors in the industry stress often that shipping is truly international, and so it is very important to preserve the role of the IMO as a prime regulatory arena, right? Also, many have highlighted concerns about the complexities of including shipping in the EU ETS in terms of it not being tailor-made to shipping. And of course, I think already you, Kasimatis and Frederick, you have highlighted some of those aspects. So I will come back to you, Fotini, referring to the balance between, let's say, international and regional measures. It is clear since last week, of course, in the IMO, we had the MEPC 80. So we have a timeline now, and we know that we are still some years away from implementing a global economic measure by the IMO. Why not wait a little bit more? What do we gain by doing this now?
Thank you, Georgios. In fact, I'll try to reply both to your question and to when it comes to the relationship between regional and international measures. Well, climate change is here, so we cannot really wait. And well, that is a little bit that is the reason why the EU has set bold economy-wide targets to implement the Paris Agreement. And in fact, we are speaking here of ETS, but our Fit for 55 package is a broader package that comprises also the FuelEU Maritime that is there to introduce a greenhouse gas intensity reduction target, a gradual one, which will allow a phased-in introduction of renewable and low-carbon fuels. We have also infrastructure regulation that's setting requirements for infrastructure to ports, and we have also addressed the supply side with the Renewable Energy Directive. Now, so in the EU, we have a very complete framework soon in place that we hope will bridge the gap between conventional and alternative fuels, promote their uptake, and ensure the infrastructure development. But at the same time that we have this framework, and the EU has always been very clear to that, is we have always been saying that what matters most is that there are international rules, because of course shipping is international by nature. And that is why we have been working, the EU member states, very hard, and us, in order to push for global regulation. And we have been engaging very actively at IMO. And in fact, we are very pleased with the outcome of last week overall. And as you said, the IMO, the MEPC said that we are going to adopt the midterm measures by 2025 with entry into force in 2027. Before diving into the why it's urgent, I'd like to say 2 words that the regional measures we have taken are important for 2 reasons at least. As we are waiting for the IMO to deliver, in fact, our EU legislation is already here to put the sector on a transition path. That's the first reason. And the second one is that it is also here to prove to the world that bold regulation is possible and that it can bring the much needed change. And in fact, by showing that example, we believe that the EU has helped in progress in the discussion at IMO, and which has resulted to the ambitious agreement at last week's MEPC. So that's a little bit to give our point of view on the regional side of measures, but clearly, as EU, we are going to continue pushing for facilitating ambitious agreements as the one we had last week. And now the next step is, of course, to work with IMO to have clear and ambitious measures adopted by 2025. And we are super pleased with the ambitious timeline that has been adopted by MEPC last week. That these measures are really needed urgently because we really need to put the green transition on track before 2030 and give clarity, greater clarity to industry, incentivize the adoption of zero emission technologies. And if you think about what it is urgent, we have this long life time span of vessels. And even if one thinks that 2040 or 2050 are far enough, they are not, because the ships that will operate then are being built or operated today. So that is why a quick adoption of measures at IMO is super important. And the last point that we are always saying, the EU legislation is containing review clause. So, in fact, when the IMO delivers on and adopts these measures, we will revisit our legislation to prevent any conflict with international rules. So.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. And you have also given us, let's say, shared your perspective about what lies ahead. So I may come back to this later, but thank you very much. And also thank you for giving a wider context in addition to the EU regional policy. Now, I would like to go to Frederic and Mette, and maybe I'll start with you, Frederic, referring to my comment about, let's say, the industry-specific versus horizontal regulation. Based on your interaction with shipping clients so far, and I presume you work with different industries, do you see a pattern or similarities with challenges in other sectors, in other hard-to-abate sectors?
Yes, thanks, Georgios. Indeed, there are some similarities and common challenges for obviously shipping alongside with the other two industries, the other two sectors, i.e. industries and aviation. Clearly, some of them can be briefly outlined. The first one is obviously could be the opening of the GSG account, as it can be somehow challenging in terms of administrative burden, and is even more challenging for non-EU based shipping company, as they will know only by early 2024 which authorities they have to contact to open their accounts. So clearly here a similarity with the other two sectors. Determining also the compliant entity is a challenge, but I would say here it's probably a bigger challenge for shipping, to the extent that shipping will have the choice between, as a compliant entity, will have the choice between the ship owner and the dock holder entity, i.e. the technical manager and the entity responsible under the ISM code. So that's obviously something to also take into consideration. A similar challenge is definitely for all sectors to understand the EU ETS market. As shipping compliant entities, will have actually, like the other sectors, to buy the same EUAs, i.e. the same units. And as a matter of fact, the interaction between the other sector is extremely important, looking at, for example, the fundamental balance for shipping. The EU has decided to generate and add to the market 81.1 million additional EUAs. So that's, I would say, the additional supply, and versus 90 million, which is based on 100% the expected market demand. And clearly, we have this, as you all know, the phasing period with 40, 70, and 100%. Therefore, one could say that the market is looking bearish. But we always need to take an holistic view when it comes to EU ETS, and based on the other sectors and legislative developments, like the reduction of LRF, the one-off rebasing, the phase out of free allocation for aviation, the market looks actually structurally bullish in the medium to long term. So the question, obviously, when you should get started is obviously as soon as possible. But the main important point here is to show how interlinked are the three sectors when it comes to the EU ETS market and in terms of pricing. So you can't just look at shipping on its own merit when looking at the pricing of EUAs. Last point maybe is to look at the trading strategies that could be similar in for aviation and industries, and clearly, at least for the first two ones, the strategies based on volume and pricing, could certainly be the similar challenges for the three sectors. Although there is one more specific trading strategy related to timing and the cost pass-through element, which was mentioned earlier on, which can be also specific or more specific to shipping. But clearly, and again, I'm sure there are other elements to show the similarities between the three sectors, but I would just wanted to highlight a few elements here for your consideration.
Very good, thank you, and thank you also for highlighting some of the let's say specialities for shipping to consider when it comes into the EU ETS. There is a much wider context. Now, I would like to move on and look at this closer, but before I do, I would like to come to you, Matt, and I would like to ask you a similar question. I mean, what can you highlight from other hard-to-abate sectors, and more generally, from the forum's perspective, how do you think economic tools such as the EU ETS can go hand in hand with other initiatives, voluntary initiatives, to help us decarbonize shipping?
Thank you. So I think we've continuously been quite focused on how to really create those synergies between the sectors and really how to take the best-in-class learnings and apply them to other sectorial challenges. So I'll highlight a few kind of structural places where we do that. So we do have, as part of the forum, we have a CEO community that really gathers supply chain and transportation CEOs, and this goes across the maritime value chain, so shipping and ports, freight forwarders, trucking, landside solutions. So one of the conversations there, obviously sustainability and resilience are some of the two key topics that are taking place in those forums. And that is really also like, how can you really take that cross-sector perspective also in a policy advocacy and actually bring an even stronger voice across and having ETS kind of across the transportation industries is a great foundation for that. So a little bit more specific on an initiative we run right now around procurement is First Movers Coalition, which we launched in 2021 in Glasgow at COP. And this is really how to leverage procurement and really send a strong demand signal towards to accelerate the near zero or zero emission technologies. And this covers shipping, aviation, and trucking, and hence we also kind of internally with us look at what are some of the actions that we can take within the shipping industry that they've had success with in shipping or in aviation. It becomes very nitty-gritty in the detail when I go into the details. I think I'll just leave it there and then kind of move to one last common denominator that I was very happy that Coutinho also mentioned before, and that's the infrastructure. Infrastructure is such a systematic thing that we really need to kind of look even more across the sectors. It's not something that shipping is going to solve entirely on its own. It's not something that aviation or trucking is going to solve entirely on its own. So how do you really kind of create that enabling environment to actually make those key progress forward? And some of that is also permitting. So that's very policy related. And if you look into where do we want to be in 2030, that's basically 6.5 years from now. Most permitting processes take much longer than that. But leaving that aside, I think we have some quite good examples we have a community of airports, for example, that is looking into really now how to become the energy hubs and powerhouses for the transition of the aviation sector. So that's quite inspiring and interesting to look at also in relation to the shipping industry. And essentially kind of applying even more of that system thinking. So kind of connecting ports, airports, landside, transportation. We had a session just held a big meeting in China. We had a session around how do you connect the green corridors or the ocean green corridors with the landside efforts to really kind of look at how do you create net zero freight networks and not just corridors that goes between ports or corridors that goes between A to B on landside or on rail points to points. So yeah, I think I'll pause there. And one thing to kind of take away from here is really the system thinking and the role of infrastructure, which I'm extremely happy to hear also that the European Commission, and I know the European Commission is looking a lot at that as well. And that's really one of the things that we're pushing for in the years to come. And then maybe just kind of go back to general on economic, how do they? I think I'll go to my introduction. The solid combination of when you combine like the incentivizing regulatory framework with good industry action, the economic mechanisms or the fuel standards that they've discussed in IMO also, that kind of creates that basic certainty, and it's up to the industry to really, it will never entirely de-risk progress. It's the industry that will kind of have to take that. There will always be an element of taking risk.
Absolutely, and of course there is an interlink between, let's say, the fuel that we will want to be using in the future, looking at 2030 and even more so in 2040, and how this will impact, let's say, exposure with respect to ETS. But I don't, maybe that's a panel discussion on its own, so I don't think we will be able to go deeper in that. But of course, policy plays a very important role, and in addition to, let's say, policy, every initiative that can support this voluntary initiative, of course, is very good. Now, I would like to go back and zoom in again on the owner's perspective. So, Stamati, I will come to you, and I have been asked a lot of very relevant questions these days by ship owners with respect to, let's say, the legal and the commercial implications, and many of them, I think, Federico already alluded to, and perhaps you have even more to share. So how do you view the challenges in relation with EU ETS for yourself and your customers, both from perspective of what needs to be done to ensure legal compliance, and also what must be done to manage the commercial risks? Stamati, to you.
Thank you, Georgios. Well, as far as we're concerned, we consider Synergy and United to be highly sophisticated companies, and we have been very early to adapt in all these new technologies associated with efficiency, the new regulations and all that. So we've been extremely proactive. However, and that's a reason of a big concern, I feel that the shipping industry is not so sophisticated as we are. On the contrary, I must remind everyone that it's a highly fragmented business, which means that you have thousands of owners located in various jurisdictions, owning thousands of ships. Only dry bulk have 13,000 ocean-going dry bulk vessels. All of the ships will be calling one way or another into European Union ports, and we have to abide under the EU regulations. So I'm very curious to see how all these ships calling EU waters and EU ports in the near future will be, compliant and paying at the end of the day, or providing the credits for their calls, especially if it's a year after the actual recording date. So that's a bit of concerning to me. I believe that the EU has thought about it and how it's going to enforce all these, billions of euros that will have to be an accrued liability towards the EU. So I'm pretty sure you've thought about it, and it's going to be monitored and policed in a way that it's not going to be a two-tier market where responsible, conscious, and proactive owners will be paying their dues, while at the same time vessels changing owners, managers, jurisdictions and all that will be avoiding that into the future, and that's going to be someone else's problem. So that's a huge concern for us. But moving into your question, George, I must say that it certainly adds a lot of complexity. We have two types of voyage employment situations. One, we have the spot voyage, where each owner is responsible for his own bunker emissions, cost dues, port use, canal fees, and all that he has to pay. And the other is the time charter, where the charter undertakes the payment of all these, fees and dues and costs, wherever that may be, whether that's a bunker provider. So for me, the most critical case here is I'm just going to present a parallel. We have many cases where time charter ships, which means that vessels chartered by major charters, that they were responsible for the bunkering of those ships, the provision of bunkers, were left unpaid. So the bunker providers, after a certain period of months not being paid, have come after the actual liable entity, which is the ship owning company or the ship itself. So we have to make sure that all this liability is protected and it's not transferred to the last sucker, put it this way, in a musical chairs kind of way. So we have to make sure that this is policed and enforced in a way which is fair and equitable for everyone operating in EU. And since I believe that this is going to be a situation for a global enforcement into the future, to make sure that this is enforced globally. As far as we are concerned, the careful selection of counterparties, as we've done so far, which is big names with huge balance sheets, responsible people that they look after the relationships, is very important. And I would avoid, until this is fully implemented, settled, and tested, I would avoid risking relationships in respect of charter and ship owner that may have risks into the future, because the cost associated with that may be colossal, not only the monetary cost, but also the reputational cost may be colossal. So one piece of advice from us is to carefully choose your relationships, carefully choose your counterparties, in order to avoid the risk which is going to come 6 months or a year after, when it's going to be the time to pay for all that. So it's very important that we select the right people into the future. And I believe that if you select the right counterparties, in a spirit of good cooperation that we have seen so far from a number of charterers, I believe that you can crystallize that in a way and to be embedded into the charter parties going forward. That's as far as we're concerned.
Fantastic, and thank you. I would say also you have identified some areas that are critical, I would say, from a commercial and legal point of view for the industry to consider. And I see that we are entering in the last part of our discussion. So time flies when you're having fun, as they say. Maybe, Mette, one last question to you before we wrap up. Looking at this, I mean, some let's say of the operators that are exposed to the EU ETS, one could argue that they have let's say a head start. Is there anything that operators can do to capitalize on this head start until, let's say, the rest of the world comes up to speed with some kind of economic measure in the IMO?
Thank you. I'll keep it short in interest of time, but so I think we all here understand, like, that a truly global industry kind of requires a global regulatory framework, and that kind of having that flexibility to actually utilize your assets best across borders, because they don't, like, ship doesn't really know of regional borders. But that kind of when we then look specifically of what is it that with ETS, I think that there are kind of the advantages that the ship owners can take from being first movers on that are quite significant as well. So clearly the EU is a front runner on setting a high standard and setting the bar high for the pace of the transition. I think that's kind of what will happen, that the transition will be even faster in an EU context. And then the specific situation that we're kind of looking into right now is actually the scarcity of fuels. There's simply not enough fuel for the transition and for the vessels that are being ordered that will sail on methanol in the near future. So being at the forefront of that is also being a first mover operating under the ETS mechanism will kind of provide a head start into securing that future supply, establishing value chain and securing the fuel. I think that's one thing. Then going back to what you mentioned, there was what I will refer to as the long tail of ship owners. So the industry doesn't only consist of the big ship owners that can essentially right now with quite a lot of cash flow kind of move into integration also with the energy suppliers. There needs to be both first movers and what I will refer to as the fast followers. So the fast followers is basically that long tail that we also all know exists. So I do truly believe that there is a head start to be had by some of the first movers, but it's very much focused around securing the fuel also.
Yeah, I get your point, and perhaps from my side would be that this primes the process and gets companies in a smaller scale to sort out, let's say, internally the processes, figure out the partners, have the contracts in place, and maybe later on towards the end of the decade, when we look at securing fuels as well, maybe this is also something to that getting this in order as quickly as possible, as Frederic said, will help. I think we are coming very quickly to the end of our discussion, and I will go back to you, Stamati, because at the end of the day, it's shipping that must implement this. So I have a different type of question just to close this discussion. And what I would like to ask is to imagine that we are in the year 2028, right? So it has been already some years that shipping is included in the ETS, and of course your company is doing great and surrendering EUAs is daily business for you, right? So I want you to let me know then in this situation, who in your team did you rely the most, or who you have partnered up with to emerge as a winner, let's say, on the other side of the EU ETS wave?
Well, thank you. I mean, obviously choosing the right counterparties for whatever you do is very critical in any type of business. And I believe that as far as the EU ETS is concerned, that's one of the best examples of how critical it is, the selection of the right counterparties. I must say here that shipping is a very slow moving and a very slow to change and adapt industry. So, you know, if you think about it, we have the same propulsion, marine propulsion for the last 50 years. It's usually very resistant to change. I believe right now we are enforcing too many regulations at the same time for a good reason. I'm not saying this is not a good reason, but it's going to take hundreds of billions or trillions in order to change all the ships out there. So it's going to entail a lot of cost and a lot of effort. I don't know what it's going to be in 2028, but I believe that it's a massive undertaking what we have right now, which it's going to take a lot of effort from all parties to be implemented. My biggest concern right now is the awareness. And thank you for hosting this panel where we try to, everybody talks about EXI and CII, but the EU ETS is still very low as far as awareness is concerned among the shipping companies. I believe that 80% is still not prepared or preparing for what's happening, and we're only half in the year, and we have a lot of preparation ahead of us, opening up of accounts and regulators and all that. So I believe that 2028 is a very optimistic scenario, but for the next 6 months, we really have to accelerate our efforts in order to spread the awareness of what's coming so people can realize what will be from 2024 onwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as I said, I mean, this has been very insightful for me, and I have enjoyed this discussion. I hope our viewers did the same. The time has gone a little bit too fast as far as I'm concerned. So here we are now. I would like to thank each and every one of you. I could have asked you 1,000 more questions, but I will hand over let's say, hand over back to the organizers. And on this note, once again, thank you very, very much. And I wish you a very nice afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.